When trouble comes, what is the price you're willing to pay to get out of it? You know, there's a saying which declares that every man has his price. And that at every price you can find a man willing to sell himself, his soul, his purpose, and or his destiny. But what is the price of failures in a man's life? Where he throws it all away, throws everything. Where would you declare, stop the world, I want to get off, in your own life? See, when somebody dies before their time, they're literally saying, stop the world, I want to get off. Because we have a right to say no to death. No to dying. This may seem like a harsh evaluation of a person and of a life that I'm asking you to examine. But Jesus made everything subject to the laws of cause and effect. If we're to learn anything from another person's life, we have to learn what they went through and why. What's the cause and effect that brought them to the state they're at. Nothing just happens. There's always a cause and there's always an effect. Therefore, we either learn from another's life and death, or we repeat the same mistakes over and over again until we declare, stop the world, I want to get off. You know, Israel went around that mountain for 40 years until everybody that lived their life in fear said, stop the world, I want to get off. And how many were left?
2.
2 just before they entered, but at the end of the 40 years, there was 3 left. Moses was still alive at that point.
Oh, okay. It's Caleb and Joshua were the other 2.
Yeah, Caleb, Joshua, and Moses. 3 were left. 3 were left out of how many millions of people? You know, if there's 2.5 million men over the age of 21, how many women were there? The men weren't all by themselves, I guarantee it.
Probably 2.5 million.
At least. Some of them had more than one wife. The average family was size 15, so how many children would there be?
Lots.
Plentitude.
A plentitude. Probably in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 million came out of Egypt.
And 3 were left.
That's devastating.
And they, because of the fear, because they wouldn't learn what Jesus was trying to teach them, they all had to say, stop the world, I want to get off. They weren't willing to walk the extra step into the promised land. Well, Jesus gave us a warning for the very last days. To beware of Satan's tactics. He seeks to wear down the saint. Well, how do you wear him down? You know, that's a question that most people don't want to answer. How do you get worn down? Do failures wear you down?
Yes.
When somebody's demeaning you and putting you down, cursing you and swearing at you, does that wear you down?
Yeah.
How about if somebody's going around hitting and kicking you? Every time they see you, they hit and kick you. Would you think it's out of love? Or do you think they're trying to wear you down, beat you up, and get you to leave the scene? Then he says, Satan would come with his special motion to wear down the saints. Well, he has a tactic of doing it. He attacks with a demeaning spirit and with shame. It is the thing that we're all victims of, in one way or another. All our lives have been victimized by being demeaned and shamed. Not encouraged and forgiven and loved, but demeaned and shamed. Well, if we're a victim of it, Eric was actually an extreme victim of it. Or he'd be with us here today. And he'd be more than willing to warn us about what he'd gone through. It made him more than willing to sell himself, his soul, his purpose, his destiny into death's hands, because he'd been worn down so much through the demeaning and the shame. Eric wanted the world to stop so that he could get off. We have to understand that. That's when he phoned about 11, 12 days ago. That was the message that came across, is that he wanted to get off. There was nothing left to live for fighting for, because everything he touched turned against him in failure. So what drives a man to this point of no return? What did Satan use to turn hope into hopelessness, joy into dread, and purpose into uselessness? Well, hope turns into hopelessness when you've lived a life of failures, and failures caused by a demeaning spirit. You know, each of us have a unique background of how it's attacked us. But it's still there attacking. We've gone through some teachings of what it's about and things like that through the Bible studies. But everybody has their own set of circumstances that they went through for demeaning to take hold, for failure to take hold. And in Eric, he faced a barrage all the time from the time he was very small. It was, well, you're no good because you're small. He was considered a runt. He's beat up, abused by others in the school system and, community because he was a runt. Too small. He was demeaned and put down because he was German. That's grounds to demean or put down anybody, regardless of what nationality you are. But he was put down. He was made to feel less than human all his life because of it. You know, he was told because of, well, he was too slow, he was too dumb to ever succeed at anything. You can never be as good as your dad or your uncle, etc. He was always being compared to somebody else. Not for the values of what he had that he could give and serve on, but how he compared to somebody else. Well, that means you don't have an identity then. You're always in comparison to how you stand up to somebody else or somebody else's standards. You know, even when he achieved things, it was, oh, that's not good enough. You know? He was told by numerous times and from numerous people in Entwistle, Wildwood, Evansburg, that he was no good because his marriage failed. He was a useless man and a worthless father because his events of his life didn't permit for a sound marriage to develop. He hadn't learned the ways. Not being encouraged into what way, but just to be demeaned so that it would be a failure. He was told, you know, that he was no good because when he got injured, he couldn't work and he couldn't pay his bills. He was a useless drain on society. Why didn't he just go bury himself in some forms of cement, you know, under the cement, and nobody would have to deal with him? He was told that he was worthless is because all you own is junk. Your family is junk, you're junk, you only collect junk, and that's all you're going to have is junk, and you're worthless, and you know, why are you wasting all the good air that God gave us? Well, that's tough to live with. You know, that's not only it takes your identity away, it takes your motivation away to succeed. No matter how good you try and make it for your family or make things work, when you're told that you're junk and everything you collect is junk and your family's junk and that's all you produce is junk, yeah, that doesn't leave much for motivation. Being told he was no good because somebody remembered a mistake he made when he was 8 years old. You know, they went constantly around telling people not to deal with him, not to give him credit, not to sell him anything that was going to be worthwhile, you know, a benefit to the farm or benefit to him. And then they prided themselves by going around and say, yeah, you failed, you failed, you failed, you failed. Because they had all this proof. They had stopped him from being able to move forward. So hopelessness sets in. A really bad scent of hopelessness sets into a person. A demeaning spirit causes you to wear many labels and badges of dishonor and many nets of shame. When friends, family, and neighbors will not forgive you for some 40 or 50-year-old mistake, then hopelessness overpowers you by the need that they have to see you fail. You know, and he was constantly being told that he couldn't be forgiven for things. That he had to pay for the rest of his life for the penalty of some mistake he made. You know? When a failure comes, and it always does, then the friends and family and neighbors gloat and declare what good prophets of doom they were over your life. And they gloated at him. And it was hard for him to forgive him. You know, they made the failure happen, and then they gloated because they were such good prophets of his future. You know, they treated the things in his life like a play rehearsal. It was recited, and every problem that he ever had, or ever could have, was made part of their little recitals that they kept going on. The demeaning spirit wins because people hate to forgive themselves and everyone else they deem to be an inferior. And he was put down as an inferior. You know, it was a big problem. Where do you go when there's no support? And this thing with this unforgiveness, I mean, that was always there against him. Always. These people felt that the spirit of vengeance ruled their heart and their mouth, and they had to speak whatever he said. And they spoke out against him. You know, even if one of his children made a mistake that he had been living with for several years, it was his fault. So this went on for years with no relief. No relief. And this results in no hope being allowed to manifest in his life. So that no love can grow when there's no hope available. A demeaning spirit causes respect to be stolen from your life. When a person feels respected, they have an inner joy in life. And you can feel it off them. That inner joy. He said it was difficult to remember any of the days of his life that had joy. When his children were born, it was a joy to him. When he got married, figuring maybe he'd have a partner to work with, he felt joy. But he said it wasn't something that he could say that he could put 2 days together in a row where there was joy in his life. A person that is respected and has this inner joy can succeed in life because that inner joy from respect overpowers the hopelessness, it overpowers the labels that people will put upon you. But if there's no inner joy, you submit to those labels, the curses. You submit to them. You give up trying to succeed because there's no purpose in it, because there's no respect behind it. Eric felt condemned because of these curses and the labels and the demeaning comments that were, as I said, they were just endless at his life. Just endless. It was hard for him to go anywhere, do anything without being the victim of somebody's potty mouth. I thought you could say, it's just. And these things and these people that he had to deal with caused him to give up. When you're constantly being torn down, it's hard to climb out of a pit, out of a depression. And the nets and webs of shame grew stronger over the years, encompassing over and over and over again. Now, a net of shame is often something that is built by witchcraft, being used on a person. And if enough people come in agreement, then you get an incantation being spoken that becomes a powerful binding force on that net. A net of shame is full of these hooks, different size hooks, like from fish hooks and all that. It's all interwoven, hooks all through it. And they're there to cause pain, to cause festering, and immobility, and self-doubt. If nobody else believes in you, can you believe in yourself? Can you even believe that Jesus loves you enough to want you? For many years that was tough for him. Really, really tough. That layers of netting from this shame was weighing him down, constantly weighing him down. He had no energy left to work, no energy left to fight anything, because it was all being drained by the net. And Eric was, as I said, was carrying great many layers of this net. And shame doesn't, because it's sticky and doesn't let you go. It's painful when you try and remove it. Anybody here ever did waxing? You know that it can be painful when you pull the wax when it cools?
Once. Once is enough.
Well, each layer to remove creates maybe 100 times that pain of waxing. Because all these hooks just rip and rip and rip at you. The glue sticks to your skin and it's ripped off raw patches. Shame is a tough thing to deal with. Jesus took shame to the cross, but we have to turn it over to him. And some of the shame that he dealt with was so severe, that he lived through, that he couldn't bear to think of it again, to think on these things, to even bring them forward, to turn over. There was so much pain. And you know, without hope and no one willing to let you free of it, no one wanting to work with you to get free of it, it becomes a burden that your body was not meant to bear. The unforgiving hearts that cursed him drove him into self-condemnation and into being unforgiving upon himself, and in the end he was miserable to himself and miserable to others because he couldn't deal with the pain, he couldn't turn it over. He couldn't establish a moment of rest for himself and his soul. And you know, when you don't get enough rest, you get miserable. Yeah, he got miserable. This burden that was placed on him was so much and so heavy that it consumed him of his life energy and allowed cancer to take over. He couldn't fight the cancer. You need hope to fight it. Yeah. The net of shame killed him, and it can kill everyone who employs it on others, on themselves, or who chooses to accept it. See, we're called not to accept that net of shame, to turn it over, to come to the altar of God and turn the shame that's in our life over to Jesus. And you know, being hour and 20 minutes from here, it was hard for me to get in, and especially for no one to turn things over. And it's not the same thing when you do it at home as when you come to the altar of God and you turn it over. Eric refused to accept healing and life because of these nets of shame that were upon him. He could have lived. He could have been resurrected even if he did die and healed entirely. But he refused. He claimed that it would never be accepted to him, or if he could never be honored, then he couldn't continue to live. Yes, there's nothing worth enduring for, nothing worth standing for, then there's nothing worth living for. Eric said, "When I die, do not resurrect me. I want to rest in Jesus." He didn't want to continue fighting. There was no heart left in him. What will Eric's life mean to you? Will it be as Jesus commanded us, that we learn from, that we learn where another made mistakes and make sure we clean them out of our lives, help others clean it out of theirs? In Matthew 22:39, Jesus said, "And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." But you see, if you're under attack of a demeaning spirit, and the nets of shame are there, are you able to love another person? You can't love yourself. And you can't receive love. So how do you go around loving another person? How do you love God when you insist on wearing a net of shame? In John 13:34, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you. That you also love one another." Attacking anybody with demeaning or this nets of shame, adding layers to them, is not love. In verse 35, he says, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, when you have love for one another." Do you have love one for another? Or do you have a complaining spirit which says, "What can I find that's wrong with you so I can feel good about condemning you, putting you in shame?" Placing people in the hands of demeaning and the webs of shame or the emptiness of hopelessness is not love. Being stuck in these demons' grips is not love for others. You know, if you're stuck there and you're not moving to get out of it, you're not walking in love either. You're not in love when they rule and maintain a strong influence over your life. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, we're all attacked constantly by a demeaning spirit from others and even within our congregation. And shame. When you don't forgive and you forget something and just never bring it up again of another person's mistake. You're not walking in mercy, so no mercy can be shown you by God. But what you sow, you reap. And that's what we have to remember. Eric's life is not a void of nothing to learn from. You know, he had a lot that we can learn from and not make the same mistakes and not live under the same torment that he chose or that was chosen for him. Learn from Eric, get free, walk in love. And death has no claim upon you. You don't have to say, "Stop the world, I want to get off." You know, we're blessed by our Father in heaven that you would have a long, prosperous, joy-filled life. Not one that's living in regrets, failures, condemnation. So in closing, we bless you with the wisdom and understanding to be free. And we call upon our Father's grace of forgiveness so that you may walk fully in love to yourself, to one another, and to God. We call on this in Jesus' name.